Look, Minister, I rise today to speak not just as a member of the Oireachtas, but like Senator Ruane, as a parent who has an acute knowledge of the system and the lack of services within it, the weekly, monthly, yearly fight for diagnoses for services. I was sickened last week to watch the primetime programme and hear how the state, our state, acted in gathering such information with the goal of aiding the Department of Health to develop a legal strategy to determine when would be a good time to settle or ask people to withdraw their case. Determine the mindsets of parents as they cope with the needs of their child. Details of marriage difficulties among parents. Details of possible addictions. Try to find a time when parents were vulnerable in extremely difficult circumstances as it was to try and settle or withdraw a case. Now, what were their cases? Why were they taken by parents? They were seeking the provision of education for their son or daughter, a right that is guaranteed in the Constitution, the fundamental right to get an education for their child. Have we made progress on the provision of education and education support since this period for children with autism? Yes, we have. We've had the provision of ASD classes, units and SNA support. But is it enough? No, it's not. Autism doesn't disappear or go away when a child finishes post-primary or primary school. Autism is a lifelong diagnosis, but there are no lifelong supports. The right of a person with autism in all areas of life are enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. However, we are far from seeing a society in which people with disabilities are ensured the same opportunities that those that are not. For people with autism, this causes difficulties in accessing education, labour market, lifelong supports, public services, housing, healthcare. It prevents them from fully participation in all areas of life. Minister, I have drafted a bill to provide equality of opportunity and treatment for persons with autism, from speaking with parents, advocacy groups, looking at best practice in other countries, and as a parent myself. An Empowerment Act for persons with Autism Spectrum for providing for health and well-being in society, the betterment of their living conditions, their participation and inclusion in society, and to make ancillary and consequential provisions in full adherence to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Person with a Disability. Minister, I ask you here personally that you and your officials would sit down, discuss this bill with me to make sure that it gets the support and doesn't hit the brick wall which the state builds to block what are fundamental rights for people with autism. The state needs to right a wrong. The state owes these men and women and their families an apology. We owe the families and all the children of children with autism an apology and answers. As I said, we need to right a wrong. Minister, ahead of World Autism Day next Friday, I ask you for support for the boys and girls, the men and women with autism and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Carrigy. Appreciate that. And like Senator Ruane, you brought a personal dimension to this, which complements these remarks of all very heartfelt remarks of the rest of the chamber. But it does bring an extra dimension to it. So, Minister, I invite you to respond to this important debate. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for taking their time to speak on this afternoon. And I took a number of notes which I'd like to respond to. And like yourself, Chair, I would like to start by thanking Senator Ruane and Senator Corrigan for sharing their personal information, and thank your children for allowing you to share their personal information with us. Because sometimes I'm off script, I'm speaking my own personal opinion at this moment in time. So it's important sometimes where people work in departments don't know or don't have to detach themselves. What's the human side and why was there such outrage about what happened last Thursday night? So I stand on your side as a person. I stand on that side as well as a minister, because I fundamentally believe that the outrage that was expressed the other night, I understand it. I understand, Lynn, what you're saying when you had to sit and talk to who is now nearly your adult daughter, that actually you brought her to trust, you brought her to share, you brought her to tell. And that is what you asked her to do in your knowledge and your training and your experience, to trust that this was the right thing to do. And last Thursday night, your daughter, Senator Carrigan, all of you sat and watched what it came to be a betrayal of trust. This isn't a conversation no longer about what is lawful and unlawful. It's a conversation about trust. And I think it's time that the state listen to actually the rights of the person with a disability. And as Senator that has left Crawford talks about putting the person at the centre, and where it started and how it has continued, which is going to Len Boylan's, yeah, I had to get the name right, sorry, conversation pieces. At this moment in time, to me, it's a conversation of we just have to stop. We need to reset it, we need to re-gauge it, we need to recalibrate it, and it needs to be independent. Now, and when the state acknowledges that we're prepared to listen, then we can step forward. But I think we have to get to that space, that we actually have to put ourselves in year spaces of what the families experienced. That is the outrage. The outrage is that the department might be detached. Perhaps the department might be lawful, but it doesn't know the human impact of what it is doing to families. Does it realise that for years the families have sought to seek a service, and perhaps the service wasn't available to be got? And that's why they ended up in litigation. In other cases, they actually, my understanding, and I'm not a legal person, but there's a judicial review system as opposed to going down the financial side of it. Like, I never knew that till last Saturday, because I had to find out and to understand. So there's a lot of wonder out there. Am I part of that? Am I in the dormant sphere of it? Where does GDPR come into? These are all really relevant questions. And I don't doubt that the department was doing their best lawfully, but perhaps there is the element of trust. That is the core value of that. That is what the Children's Ombudsman speaks about. That's what Conor O'Mahony speaks about. That's what you want me to speak about. That's what I've spoke about for the last 4 years. And just because I come a government minister doesn't mean I throw all that in the boot of the car and forget about those values, because those are very important values. So I'm delighted that the Taoiseach has put an advisory committee in place. I am delighted that the Secretary-General is looking to publish it and seeking that legal advice. I don't know the time frame, Senator Conway, as to when it will be or won't be, but I do know that the department have worked really hard all weekend. They've worked really, really hard to actually answer the questions: how many is within that dormant, how many is currently active, how are they going to communicate? That is what they are working on as we speak this moment in time. Because the most important thing is we need to re-establish that trust. We need to have that answers. And if we don't, we need to formulate how we can actually recalibrate going forward. So, as I say, and as for your bill, Senator Corrigan, of course I'd be delighted to sit down and talk to you. And of course I would be delighted that all officials would sit down and have that conversation. And I would say to you, when we talk about children and autism, let's involve others. Have more people to the table. Bring people to the table on that conversation. There's good people with lived experience, and I think have us all involved, because that's when we can actually make it a more collective, more sense of purpose when you have the voices there. And yes, it is, this week starts Autism Month, and I do look forward to possibly stepping forward on Thursday with having a published senior council. That's the first level of transparency. That's the first stage that we can set forward on. That's what I would wish for. I hope it can come to pass. But I will be lending every support to World Autism Day for the entire month, needless to say. But it goes back to the fundamental. It's a rights-based issue. We need to keep the young people at the centre of it. It has to be about those young people. And for far too long, it hasn't been a conversation that has got the airing that has been required on the floors of these chambers or on the upper house. But at this stage, that's why we need, I actually personally believe, more ladies involved in politics. So, but it brings that empathy piece to it, and we can bring this value system to persons with disability and have real meaningful conversations, and not to be afraid to articulate it or to be closed down on it for other priority issues. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to talk.
Thank you indeed, Minister, for that comprehensive